So today we're going to be cooking this tri-tip roast, or steak. I'm not really sure where the dividing line is. Some people call it a steak, some people call it a roast. Whatever you want to call it, that's what we're going to be making today. It's kind of one of those trendy cuts that people have been using lately because it's less expensive than some other cuts, but at $9.42 a pound, it's still pretty expensive, but I guess comparatively speaking, it's cheaper than some others. And it does have a lot of flavor, so I would suggest giving it a shot. And another cool thing about this thing too is they're not that hard to cook. It's not like a brisket or anything like that where it needs to cook for a really long time to become tender. These can be cooked to medium rare. So we're going to fire up the smoker, put it in there, and we're going to make that into sandwiches. We're going to top it with sauteed mushrooms and an herb goat cheese spread. It's going to be really good, so let's get going with this. Okay, so the first thing we need to do here is to season this thing very liberally with salt and pepper, and depending on where you buy it from, there may or may not be some excess fat to trim away. This one really wasn't that bad, but if yours is a little thick in a few spots, you want to trim it down to a reasonable level. And I know I've said this before, but don't shortchange the seasoning. It's a thick cut of meat and it requires a lot of salt, so make sure you use enough. You could put a rub on this thing if you want, that's entirely up to you. I think the salt and pepper is going to do a pretty good job for what I'm doing today though. And as far as the amount of time you want to leave it on there, overnight would be good, but I'm actually going to fire up the grill right now. So for me, this isn't going to be on there very long, maybe 30 minutes. So let's head out and let's get the grill fired up. As always, to get the chimney starter going, fill the bottom portion with crumpled newspaper, flip the chimney over, fill the top portion with charcoal, and light the newspaper underneath the charcoal. And it usually takes about 20 or 30 minutes for the coals to fully light up after doing this. Well, I think my cooking on my channel is becoming a little bit more popular because I've got a little bit of an audience today. Alright, you can see the coals are lit up now, so I'll go ahead and empty them into the side box of the smoker, and I'll toss in one log that's about this size and just kind of nestle it in there. Prop open the side door, and before we get going too far with this, make sure to give the grate a good brushing so we can start with a clean grill. Alright, behind me you can see that the log has fully caught fire, so let's go ahead and close this lid. We'll head on in, grab the steak, and get this thing going. So I'm going to place this thing pretty much in the center of the smoker, and if you built the fire properly, the smoke you see should be a somewhat transparent bluish color like you see here. And when your first log has nearly burned away, place another one on top and leave the lid open until it fully catches fire, and then close the lid. And repeat this process a few more times until you've burned through 4 to 5 logs total. Alright, so I've burned through 4 of those logs, so it should have pretty decent smoke flavor and a good smoke ring on it now. So let's go ahead and take it off the grill. We'll take it inside and finish it up in the oven. Alright, so I've got the oven preheated to 250 degrees, but before putting it in, I'm going to go ahead and get a temperature readout to see where it's at, because that'll give me an idea of how long it needs to stay in the oven for. Okay, with this thing sitting at about 110 right now and the oven at 250, I'm gonna guess it's gonna take 30 to 45 minutes for this thing to reach 125 to get to medium rare. So while that's in the oven, let's go ahead and get our toppings ready. Okay, for the mushrooms, I am just using your basic button mushrooms here and slicing them up. There's no need to be fancy here and buy expensive ones. The cheap ones will work just fine. And once you have them all sliced up, place a saute pan over medium heat along with a little bit of butter, and once the butter melts, toss in the mushrooms along with a pinch of salt. And we're going to cook these down for about 5 minutes until they've softened up considerably and they've taken on a little bit of color. The biggest mistake novice cooks make with mushrooms is undercooking them. The texture of an undercooked mushroom is not good. They should look something like what you see here. Okay, now that we have our mushrooms ready, let's go ahead and get our herb goat cheese ready. And for the herbs, some stores sell this mixture called a poultry mix, which is sage, rosemary, and thyme, and it's perfect for this. If you can't find that, use whatever herbs you like, or you can pick one of them or buy them all separately. That's entirely up to you. And for the goat cheese, it mixes together better when it's warm, but it comes out of the package better when it's cold. So I'm gonna take it out of the package now and let it warm up and cut the herbs up and get this thing going. So let's do this. Okay, for the herb goat cheese, the first thing I'm going to do is plop the goat cheese into a mixing bowl and set it aside. And for the herbs, I'm going to separate the rosemary and thyme leaves from their stems by sort of peeling them away from the top of the stem. Toss in a few sage leaves, wad them up, and run your knife through them until they're pretty well minced up. You don't want to encounter any unpleasantly large herb chunks when eating the sandwich, so make sure these are chopped up pretty good. Go ahead and load them into the mixing bowl with the cheese and work it all together with a spoon or a spatula. I don't really have an exact ratio for this mixture, just make sure to use a decent amount of herbs and it should turn out the same pretty much every time. And that's it for the herb goat cheese. It's a pretty easy recipe to make. Alright, so we've got our mushrooms ready, we've got our herb goat cheese ready. This thing's been in the oven now for about 40 minutes, so let's go ahead and take it out and see where we're sitting with it. So when inserting the thermometer into the thicker side of this thing, we can see we're sitting at about 130, which is perfect for medium rare, and this needs to rest now. So while that's resting, I've spread some mayo across the surface of a sandwich bun and we'll give it a toasting in a non-stick pan. You can use either butter or mayonnaise for this step, but I personally like the browning that comes from mayo. Alright, that's out of the way, so let's cut into our roast and see what it looks like. And with tri-tip, the grain splits in 2 different directions about right here, so that's always going to be your first cut when working with tri-tip. And we've got a pretty legit looking medium rare here, so for the sandwich I prefer long thin slices, kind of like what you do for brisket, and it's a good idea to do it that way anyway because thicker tri-tip slices are usually kind of tough. And once you have all of your knife work out of the way with your slices, you can go ahead and assemble your sandwich. Start by laying out some of the steak, followed up by a few mushrooms, and finally spread some of the herb goat cheese across the top bun, and that's it. The only thing left to do now is to gobble the whole goddamn thing up. But with that, we've reached the end of the video, so as always, thanks for tuning in and we'll see you next time.